Now, there's been mixed reaction to Treasury's decision to reverse the proposed hike in value-added tax. Some analysts warn that while consumers will feel relief, they are likely to feel the pinch elsewhere as government looks to plug a 75 billion rand revenue deficit. African Investment and Research Chief Executive Dr. Iraj Abedian joins us now for more. A very good evening to you, Dr. Abedian. Thanks very much for your time. The politicians certainly are rejoicing, all of them staking a claim, saying, I am, not you, responsible for the finance minister's about turn. Just your thoughts on what the finance minister has done here.
Well, good evening to you and to our viewers. I think they all have the right to celebrate. That's the nature of politicians. But from a vantage point of fiscal management and the economics of it, specifically from a fiscal point of view where I focus on, there is no doubt that this is the right decision to come out of the process. It's been a very embarrassing and unnecessary destabilizing kind of process. But at the end, two things have emerged. One is that the Minister of Finance going forward need to be a lot more cognizant of the implications in our political setup for the society and for the working class and for the economy as a whole. Secondly, and perhaps more significantly, that the Ministers of Finance cannot, and broadly, not just the minister, but the cabinet, cannot ignore the revenue base of the economy or the governments of the day. And over the past 15 years, quite clearly, the revenue side has been neglected just about completely. And you cannot have an economy generating revenue unless growth happens. And growth cannot happen unless investment happens. So I think that part has been neglected for 15 years. And all of it is not the responsibility of the current Minister of Finance, but he has had his own fair share and the current cabinet more broadly. That issue has come to the fore. And the reason I say this from a fiscal point of view is that over the past 15 years, every time that there was a shortfall, go and borrow more, go and borrow more, and borrow, to the point that public debt now has become the single largest servicing responsibility of the national budget, which means 22% of government revenue goes to servicing public debt. And that has come quite clearly. And second, so that from that point of view, it has focused the mind, and hopefully going forward, that will be the centerpiece of macroeconomic management and fiscal management going forward. I don't get really either depressed or excited by the short-term political shenanigans that all of them get engaged in, but I'm somewhat disappointed that none of them has come and say, or by that I mean none of the political parties have come and say, this is a national priority. This is what we should focus on. Celebrating that the VAT has reversed is not where the focus of our political leadership should be. But that is where they are, and that is where, as a nation, we need to continuously, in a way, expect of our political leadership across the political spectrum that the focus must be creating jobs, creating revenue, creating self-reliance within the community, and not borrow every time that there is a shortfall.
Now, given the fact, Dr. Abedian, that we have, as you say, ignored, for the longest time, ignored the revenue side of the budget, what then are the fiscal implications of this move, given the fact that we are not where we should be? We haven't thought about or focused on the issues that you've mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's a very key point, Vuyo, that let me also make the point that even if the 0.5% went through, even if 1% went through, even if 2% went through, I can assure you that if we don't pay attention to growth as a matter of national priority, almost for me as a student of economics, it's a national emergency. Next year, this time, we would have a bigger gap. And therefore, the gap as a short-term challenge that the National Treasury has really has got two solutions. One is for the National Minister of Finance to sit down with the technical team and cut out all the unnecessary expenses. And there is plenty of it. There is more than the so-called shortfall. But the minister needs to show spine, needs to leadership, and the cabinet needs to stand behind him. That's the short-term solution. That's not going to deal with the bigger issue. Even if we cut expenditure, unnecessary expenditure by 80 billion next year, this time, as I mentioned, unless we deal with the growth and with the revenue, we'll have a bigger gap. So that is a short-term solution. The second part of the short-term solution is, which I believe SARS has been focusing on, is to collect some of the uncollected and disputed tax liabilities or outstanding tax claims, if you like. And that is a very important element. And as we know, the SARS has been given 2 billion rand to jack up its capacity to go after the 80 billion outstanding taxes. So those are the two components of the short-term solution. But even if SARS does that, next year, this time, we'll have a bigger gap. And that requires really convening. If I was the president, Buyo, I would convene a national emergency workshop to say, how are we going to turn our economy around? As you know, IMF 2 days ago downgraded growth, expected growth of South Africa. Remember, South Africa's budget as presented, the growth is expected to go from 0.6% in 2024 to this year, 1.7. Now, you tell me 1 quarter of the year has gone behind us, 3 quarters left, nothing has changed. How are we going to jack up our growth? And we have a shortfall of 80 if, based on the budget projections, if the economy grew at 1.7%. Now we know that it's going to grow at 1, possibly less than 1. So the gap is not just about 80 billion, it's far more than that. And therefore it justifies, in my view, a national emergency policy workshop for the president, not the Minister of Finance, for the president to lead, for the business and other stakeholders to say, we cannot sit and do nothing, hoping that this gap will somehow self-correct. It won't.
Do you see the president doing that? And our leaders broadly, are their hearts and minds at the right place on this one? Is there evidence that they are even thinking about the issues you're raising?
You and I think you know the answer. Based on, if you're looking by past experience, the answer is emphatically no. The fact that all our political leaders are jumping up and down celebrating reversal of a 0.5% gap, instead of saying, okay, now that this disaster is behind us, let's focus on the real issue. None of them is calling for national emergency, call it Bosberat, call it Lehotla, call it whatever you like. So we come out of it as a nation saying we need to get our economy back on track. We cannot continue. And I cannot really overemphasize this fact that we cannot talk about a gap of 80 billion. We have a gap much larger than that ahead of us if we don't deal with growth. Not going from 0.5% to 1% we need to jump up our growth, raise our growth to 3.5% to 4% in order for you and I have not a discussion about the gap, a discussion about how are we going to then use the revenues, correcting some of the obvious historic as well as current social, economic, political issues that we have in the form of the very well-known, much spoken about poverty, unemployment, and equality. You cannot solve those things unless we get growth to the level of 3.5% to 4%. That has to be the focus of all political leaders, not this type of jamboree that they're displaying in the parliament at the moment.
Theoretically, at least, Dr. Abedian, I mean, can VAT hikes raise tax without necessarily hurting the poor? Is that possible?
Of course not. VAT increase, they all the fiscal experts and tax collecting authorities, they say VAT is an easy one. But it's not. VAT, we know under apartheid system, got so unproductive, because if you push the citizens more and more to overtax them, especially if you tax them and not delivering services, then you dilute what is called tax morality. Now was tax compliance by the poor and the rich and everybody gets compromised. And our economy is very much on that very knife edge, that the inefficiency of public spend together with overtaxed population pushes the tax morality off the table, which means you can increase the tax, but you're not going to get the revenue, or you're not going to get as much revenue that you would hope or you would expect to get. So I think we need to be also very careful that there are limits to taxation, and the society cannot be taxed, and nobody knows what happens to the proceeds of the tax. If we look at the potholes, if we look at the education system, if we look at the state of hospitals, if we look at the state of police station, if we look at the way expenditure is if you like, managed or mismanaged.
Now, when hopefully this embarrassing period, destabilizing period is over, outside of the issues that you have raised about what the president should be doing now and where the focus should be, what else do you think this episode must or will have taught us?
I think that's what else, a lot of issues for me, quite frankly. There are two very important dimensions of this episode that we have experienced since February that we need to, as a nation, worry about. One is at a technical level, which is sort of my areas of expertise. And the other one is the operations of the government of national unity or the coalition government, no matter who is in that coalition. Both of these pillars of fiscal management have shown big fault lines. And equally importantly, apart from paying attention to the growth, we need to strengthen, Buyo. We need to strengthen the technical underpinning of putting a budget together, looking at sustainability of it, looking at the medium-term sustainability of our fiscal framework. And at that level, it's quite clear that this budget was not put together with solid technical underpin. Otherwise, you wouldn't have this kind of embarrassing situation. The second part of it is that our cabinet needs to sit down and discuss very honestly and with a heavy dose of patriotism, with a heavy dose of attention to the national priorities, how a budget, totality of it, how it should be spent to make sure that our economy takes care of the vulnerable part of our society, but at the same time, manage the expenditure such that we get growth going. We can build and rebuild the brand in the country. And Buyo, it's important, and you know this better than me, that if we look at our capabilities, this is an economy that was growing at 5.5%, definitely around 5%, between 4.5% and 5.5%. So we do have the capacity. This economy has got the potential, but it's the task of the government and all the political parties to unlock that capacity and not make the country in a very vulnerable state that it is. We are called globally, in our global ranking, we are one of the fragile emerging economies. This is the economy that before 2007 was the top performing emerging economy after China. Now we've sunk very low, and we need to pick up ourselves, and we can only do it with the appropriate fiscal, political, and technical input. It's not a one piece. It's not a political issue. Politics is very important. It's not just technical issue that's important, but we need to put all of the pieces together, as once upon a time we did 15, 20 years ago.
Dr. Iraj Abedian, thank you very much for your time and insights. Really appreciate it.